Welcome back everyone, and today we'll be doing an overview of Fatal Fury 2 and Fatal Fury Special. Fatal Fury 2 is a 1992 fighting game that came for both, of course, the arcade, home Neo Geo Arcade Entertainment System, or AES, and also came to different several home systems such as the Super Nintendo, Genesis, PC Engine CD, and even the portable Game Boy Advance. It is, of course, sequel to the Fatal Fury King of Fighters and a second game in the franchise. While the original Fatal Fury, of course, had a strong resemblance to Street Fighter, especially since the producer director created the original Street Fighter game, Fatal Fury 2 is definitely more of a blatant clone. A lot of the things that Street Fighter 2 introduced, such as multiple characters, was definitely copied over and used in this sequel. For example, in the first game, you only had 3 characters you could choose from, and this one you could choose from a roster of about 8. You could still hop back and forth between the background and the foreground. There's 5 new characters: Cheng Zhan, Jubei Yamada, Big Bear, of course, the introduction of Mai Shiranui, and Kip Kapwan. There are also 4 bosses that aren't playable in this version of the game. You do have Billy Kane, Axel Hawk, Lawrence Blood, and Wolfgang Krauser. This time around, with Geese Howard's believed demise from the first game, the new organizer for the tournament is Wolfgang Krauser. The controls have been altered slightly, so you now both have a light punch, a strong punch, a light kick, and a medium kick. And instead of using a button to actually switch between the foreground and background, you have to do a combination of A, B, or C, D. Everything from the size of the character roster to the combo systems, and also to the each character having a different stage set in a different country. Definitely more of a slight nod, more than a slight nod to Street Fighter 2. There are a few new techniques, new moves that have been introduced into the series with this particular installment. There's also a desperation move whenever your health goes low, which of course carries over into the actual King of Fighters tournament later on. It's possible to hop back, hop forward. You can also, even crawl forward as well by pressing down, forward, roll. This techniques, definitely, weren't quite as Street Fighter 2, but there were definitely some nods to that as well. Usually, a lot of folks are not a fan of the plane switching. Most folks think it's just kind of a gimmick or a novelty. While definitely a gimmick in the first game, it does add some interesting gameplay elements to this one because, of course, it has more of a pseudo 3D, being able to sidestep some specials. Of course, a lot of the timing is still pretty difficult. This game controlled very well for its time, but going back and playing this game, you definitely recognize how much kind of a slower and looser the controls feel. You can, of course, knock opponents into or out of the background by pressing the A, B, or the CD buttons when you're in kind of opposite planes, hopping back and forth. Other than that, though, everything else is really similar between Fatal Fury 2 and Street Fighter 2. So there's a bit more of a combo, I guess, reliance in this game that wasn't in the first game, but definitely, not a copy and paste. It is still a bit of slower, especially compared to Street Fighter 2. The jumping is a little more leaden, so the characters don't jump quite as quick. It is annoying that the AI has a higher preference, so if you jump in and attack, the AI can actually, I don't know if they're input reading or if it's just automatic once you even make a movement, that it starts to jump. You can actually jump after you, and their jump attack would land before your jump attack. So that does get pretty annoying. Um, Other the things that I do enjoy beyond that, of course, are the characters which are now bigger. The sprites are more defined. The backgrounds have a lot more detail. There's a bit of parallax to them. So, for example, the one nice thing about going to different locations, the scenery still changes between rounds. It changes from say light to darkness, going to rain, moving along the water in Hong Kong, floating down the river, going the train tracks of Mount Rushmore, while you're fighting on top of the train. So the attention to detail and the the marked difference really between the first game and second game backgrounds are quite amazing. How much I was able to come across, back in those days, and again, still on the same hardware. And I think once you know the Fatal Fury series jumps to three onwards, where you start to really see where kind of the real about graphic style and combo system comes into play. I think Fatal Fury really comes to its own, especially right before it goes to Goro Mark of the Wolves. There's, as I mentioned, quite a few ports for the Neo Geo CD, Super Nintendo, Genesis. The Genesis is actually the way I played this game. Besides, of course, now playing the Switch ACA version. With those slight nitpicks aside, as far as the AI still being a bit cheap and having priority on some of those jumping attacks, Fatal Fury 2 is definitely a much better game than the first in the series. However, it pales in comparison. I think if I did have to pick out of the first three Fatal Fury games, Fatal Fury Special is actually my favorite, just because a lot of the balance and changes that they introduced. So we'll be going to that game next. And at last, we come to Fatal Fury Special. And honestly, Fatal Fury Special makes Fatal Fury 2 pretty much worthless. It's still definitely Fatal Fury 2, but it's basically like the Championship Turbo Hyper Edition. There's definitely, some slight, very minute changes to the gameplay. It's a little bit faster. A few characters have some extra moves. The combos feel smoother to kind of get out. The AI is still pretty tough, especially once you get past the third character. But it does kind of flow fairly smooth, especially compared to the first two games. I think if you did have to pick, as I mentioned earlier, from the first three games, which one to pick up for your AES, I think Fatal Fury Special is definitely the one to get if you're on a budget. And but if you need to pick up all of them, you're definitely going to be picking up all of them regardless. Basically, this game doesn't really take place canon-wise. It's kind of like King of Fighters 98 Dream Match, where it kind of ignores the plot, adds in some extra characters, even more so than Fatal Fury 2. So Fatal Fury 2 introduced 8 more characters you can play. This particular version, being the Championship Turbo Hyper Edition, also lets you play as 3 other characters from the first game. So Tung Fu Ryu, which is Terry's master, Duck King, and also Geese Howard are now playable. In fact, there is even a secret in the arcade, which I have not been able to do on this home version because, well, to be honest, I'm not quite as good. But supposedly in the first game, especially in the arcade, that if you're able to beat the game without losing any rounds, Ryo Sakazaki from Art of Fighting is actually there. And if you beat Ryo Sakazaki, he's actually playable. And so you can add, so a grand total of about 16 characters would be playable. And a lot of the stages, of course, still from Fatal Fury 2 are still there. They still, cycle through the different times of day, going from day, midday, afternoon, or afternoon or to early dusks. Each of those 4 new characters, of course, have their own stage as well, like Ducking stage, where it has strobe effects, as you can see here, kind of a live rave. There's also several different Art of Fighting cameos in the backgrounds as well. In fact, in Terry's stage, you can see Kim flying by, and when the timer reaches 20. He doesn't appear apparently in some other stages. In Andy's stage, there's a guy driving on a scooter that drives away, and actually in some of the fights, you can if you're not switching different planes, you can actually knock the enemy character, or your character can get knocked into that person riding on the bike. So little touches like that are one of the main things that I do love about SNK and Neo Geo, as they add those kind of little touches to each one. It's definitely the most popular out of the first three, just because of all the different changes that they introduce to this gameplay. It's a lot, again, as I mentioned, it's just fast enough that the controls don't feel sluggish. It definitely is tighter and closer to that real bout feel. And of course, after this, when you go to Fatal Fury 3, it definitely comes to in a zone where the gameplay and controls are very well done. There are, of course, other home ports for this title. There weren't quite as many for the special version. There was a Sega CD version, which had great music. Sound was a little muffled, but otherwise not too bad. And of course, the load times were horrendous. There was also a PC Engine arcade CD version, which was really, really well done. You can, of course, now pick these games up on Xbox, PlayStation Store as well. Again, out of all of them, the first three, this is definitely my pick as far as the game to get. It's gotten a lot of the gameplay balances. Some of the characters again do have an extra move, which I wouldn't say changes the gameplay much, but it helps to balance and differentiate the fighters, and that's one of the things I do love about SNK, especially the Fatal Fury series. There's really no two characters that are clones of each other. Like Terry Bogard controls very different than Andy Bogard. Joe Higashi controls very different than the first three, and all the three added characters, while they could share some similar motions in order to, release some of their special moves, a lot of their gameplay, the weaknesses, the effectiveness of their attacks, and at times to use them, there's definitely changes. There is still that annoying piece where the computer does have priority when you're jumping in. So if you're jumping into attack and the computer jumps, they can still jump up and knock you out of your attack, which is really quite annoying. Other than that, though, the game itself is still a blast to play, and my pick if you only could pick up one of the original first three Fatal Fury games for your Neo Geo AES collection. But if you are a Switch owner, PS4 or Xbox owner, and a fan of fighting games, I do definitely recommend this. It is also on the Fatal Fury Battle Archives 1. That's on PS2. The Battle Archives 1 unfortunately is not on the PS4, but Battle Archives 2 is, which includes the Real Bout game series, which I'll be going into at a later point. The next video that I'll be doing fairly soon, which will be next weekend, which will be a very short overview of Fatal Fury 3, and then I'll do a compendium of the Real Bout series, which is Real Bout Special, and Real Bout 2 Newcomers. Garou Mark of the Wolves will be its own kind of video, and I think I'll kind of switch up, and then for Garou, I probably will be recording the video from the Neo Geo MVSX unit, which recently came out. Again, these are all emulated. I no longer have these games on Neo Geo AES. I did actually have all the Fatal Fury games, all the King of Fighters games, but ended up actually selling my unit to fund my PS5, Xbox Series X, and also the Neo Geo MVSX. So I thought for me that was a worthy trade in regards to consolidating my collection, and also while it was nice to have those cartridges, the Neo Geo AES cartridges in the box, they were mostly display pieces. So for me, it was worth it to go ahead and move forward and sell my collection. Then again, folks, thanks again for watching this installment. Again, I will be following up next week with Fatal Fury 3, and then probably in the same weekend, I'll probably also go ahead and do Real Bout Special series as well. Thanks for watching.